You got everybody? Okay. Okay. Well, good morning. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And I wanted to start by thanking Farm Bureau for hosting us this morning. It was a great discussion and appreciate you letting us utilize your facility for the press conference this morning. You know, this morning I had the privilege of meeting with EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. I also had the opportunity to attend a roundtable with the administrator and Iowa farmers to have the opportunity to discuss the Waters of the United States Rule, or WOTUS. I want to just take this opportunity to thank Administrator Pruitt for traveling to Iowa to hear directly from our farmers about how the WOTUS rule will affect us and how we can work together to get the next version of this rule right. The administration continues to show a willingness to partner with states, and for that we are incredibly thankful. I would also like to thank the administrator for the positive steps already shown by the administration in rescinding the federally invasive Waters of the U.S. rule. His commitment to listening to states when drafting the new rule shows his true commitment and the commitment of the administration to a balanced state and federal partnership. And I can tell you that throughout this roundtable, partnership came up a lot. He started talking about the role of partnership in really defining what this new role looks like, and it was certainly reiterated by many of the farmers that participated in the roundtable. The 2015 Waters of the U.S. rule released during the Obama administration was a massive federal land grab. It created confusion and uncertainty for regulators, farmers, ranchers, and others who depend on their ability to work the land. The rule also imposed enormous regulatory roadblocks and cost for acts as simple as moving dirt in low places on the landscape. As the administration considers the rewrite of WOTUS, we would encourage them to take the Scalia approach, and that approach would significantly scale back the amount of federal overreach seen in this first rule. The federal government needs to continue working with the state and local leaders to make sure that we get the rule right this time around. And so again, I'll just close my remarks by commending President Trump and his administration for proactively taking steps to do that. That did not happen before when the rule went into place in 2015, and we really appreciate the accessibility of this administration. And with that, we turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Gregg.
Thank you, Governor, and good morning. I'd also like to thank Administrator Pruitt for taking the time to travel to Iowa to meet with farmers and hear directly from the people that WOTUS will impact the most. Here in Iowa, we pride ourselves on caring for and cultivating our land. We want to partner with the federal government to best protect and utilize our natural resources. I'm also incredibly grateful for this administration's decision to rescind the 2015 Waters of the United States rule. The initial rule would have put 97% of the state under the jurisdiction of the EPA. That's just crazy. We advocated very strongly for the withdrawal of this rule. We're very thankful that the administration fulfilled that promise to roll back the Obama administration federal land grab. And Administrator Pruitt said something very profound in our conversation this morning. He said the previous rule was really more about federal power than it was about water quality. This rewrite gives us the opportunity to focus on water quality. Iowans care very strongly about protecting our natural resources, and we look forward to partnering with the federal government as they rewrite this rule in a responsible and sensible way. With that, I'll turn it over to Senator Grassley.
If another person had been elected president and we would have had a different EPA director, with Waters of the U.S. a few years down the road, maybe less than a few years down the road, you would soon have to have a permit to do normal farming operations. I think it ended up that way because the previous administration, along the lines of what our Lieutenant Governor just said, was not so much interested in environment as they were having control of personal property and private property over throughout the United States through EPA law. So I'm here to compliment Administrator Pruitt on proceeding in the deliberate way he has had to get people's opinions about what's wrong with waters of the U.S., what should be put in the definition of waters under federal law for the future, not only to hear in the process of rewriting, but also in the process later on of deliberations for the enforcement of that new rule. It's quite obvious that the interest of the family farmer was not taken into consideration by the previous administration, and I think what I get from this meeting we had today, that's a core principle of this administration through President Trump and being delivered through the outstanding work of the Administrator of EPA, Pruitt.
Yes, I don't want to echo too much of what has already been said this morning, but I do want to thank the Trump administration and especially Administrator Scott Pruitt for taking the time to come out and visit with all of us, and probably more importantly, the actual people on the ground that are impacted by the expanded definition of waters of the U.S. Those are our farmers, our ranchers, our business owners, our developers, every single entity across the state of Iowa. As the Lieutenant Governor stated, 97% of the state of Iowa falls under what is now considered waters of the U.S. That's a bit extreme, even for the federal government. In 2015, after the rule was put in place, I led an effort in the United States Senate to overturn the expanded definition of waters of the U.S. It passed handily through the Senate, it passed through the House, and it was promptly vetoed by the President Obama, in early 2016. Now we have the opportunity to right this wrong, not just for the folks here in Iowa, but all of those that are engaged in ranching and farming and other activities across the United States. And I appreciate the federalist approach that Administrator Pruitt has in actually working with the individual needs of the states in what is now a partnership. We truly appreciate it. And again, I want to thank Farm Bureau for hosting today and for giving us the opportunity to hear from those that are affected by the waters of the U.S. Thank you.
Had a wonderful meeting with the Administrator Pruitt today. Asked a lot of questions. He's not only traveling to Iowa, he's been traveling around the country to be able to hear the impact on folks, what that previous rule would have been, and then how to write a rule that's much more appropriate. So in some of our conversations, as well as reemphasized by our farmers, a lot of conversation about the good water quality work that we're doing here in Iowa, including nutrient reduction wetlands, and how those can get stuck in that definition of the old rule about a permitting process that could delay the process of putting in a water quality friendly practice like a nutrient reduction wetland that'll reduce the nutrients coming off our farmland by 50%, and yet it got held up. It would be more expensive because of the way the old rule was operating and the permitting process required by the Corps of Engineers, the mitigation costs as well. And so to be able to do those kinds of water quality friendly practices, including the farmers, looking at different practices they want to do on their land, I think the administrator was very aware of the potential of that, but said this is unique compared to some of the other conversations he had in other places. So he asked questions, was very engaged, asked for more input as well. And I think not only the process of making sure that rule is written right, but also then the opportunity to be able to look back and comment on the rule as it's actually written, to come back to Iowa, to be able to have more input in the future into what that impact is. I'm very excited about the conversations we had today and what that means for our water quality friendly practices that we're doing here in Iowa. So Craig Hill, thank you for hosting us and hosting this group.
Well, I'm Craig Hill. I'm a Warren County, Iowa farmer and president of the Iowa Farm Bureau. And I will tell you, in my tenure as president of the Iowa Farm Bureau, there's never been a more consequential decision made by an agency government than was made by the EPA when they delivered this new rule upon Iowa landowners. It defies, I believe, congressional intent. It defies what I think have been reasonable court opinions. And it set a stage where farmers had no clarity, no understanding of what was the jurisdiction of the federal government or what was the obligation by regulatory bodies. This new rule, hopefully, will provide clarity. There was 371 electronic pages, 107,686 words that were drafted that should never have been written. And we're very pleased to be able to afford our farmers something that's more corresponding to the Clean Water Act, which we support. And we look forward to the state of Iowa, hopefully, with a clean water bill next legislative session. I want to thank all of those that are here today representing Iowa farmers, our legislative leaders. They're doing a great job for us. And so with that, Governor?
We'll open it up for questions. Another comment that Administrator Pruitt made is they took the Clean Water Act with the 2015 Waters of the U.S. and really the EPA reimagined beyond the intent of the congressional requirements in the Clean Water Act. And he was assured us all that it would go back to what that intent was as he reached out to farmers. I believe it's 26 states. He anticipates being in to get feedback as they work to close the comment for the rule that was rescinded and then start the rewrite moving forward. So we talked about 97% of our land that would be impacted. I believe we had representation from the Missouri Farm Bureau as well as the Kansas Farm Bureau. Missouri was 98% of their land would have been impacted by the 2015 waters of the U.S. Also had a commercial real estate developer that had issues from a developer perspective too, and the cost and the delay in trying to do commercial real estate development. So it is across the board the impact that this had on not only farmers but local governments and builders and developers as well.
So you met privately with him this morning?
Yeah, the senator and I and Secretary Northey had an opportunity to just welcome him to Iowa and meet with him prior to the, right. Sorry. That's okay.
What do you think would be an effective partnership with the EPA that makes sense?
Well, first of all, the previous administration, Secretary Northey and the Department of Natural Resources and Iowa State worked together collaboratively to put together a scientific and technology-based volunteer program with the Nutrient Reduction Strategy Program, and it's working. And when we had Administrator McCarthy actually traveled to the state of Iowa, she highlighted that as a role model that other states should implement and follow, and was very complimentary of the strategy that we had in place to highlight best practices and then look for opportunities with funding to scale to improve our water quality and soil health. And then went back to Washington, D.C., and with the 2015 Waters of the U.S., it did just the opposite. It really restricted the ability of our farmers and our local governments to really do what they needed to do, and our communities to implement water quality initiatives. And so there was so much uncertainty. It made them be conscientious of applying conservation practices because they didn't know if they would come back and say that they didn't meet the criteria. And so just the uncertainty that was caused with the overreach of the 2015 Waters of the U.S., it dramatically had an impact on our ability to move forward with conservation practices for not only water quality, but for soil health.
So is the answer then just leave you alone?
Well, I think it's a partnership, but I think we want clarity. We want more predictability. We want to define what's included in that. And Administrator Pruitt talked about really setting aside things that would not be impacted. And so that our farmers and our producers and our ranchers and our developers are clear what qualifies and what not. And if somebody, Craig, do you want to kind of weigh in on that?
So this new rule created new definitions that had never been used before. And those new definitions needed some clarity about them. The only resource a farmer had to understand where is the jurisdiction lines of EPA was to go to the Army Corps of Engineers. And there was no Army Corps of Engineer office in Iowa. we have no resource to tell us what is jurisdictional and what is not. And if 97% of the state, 30 million acres, is jurisdictional, 400,000 common land units, every farmer has a different topography, and they want to know if their grassed waterway or if their terraces comply with federal law. They have no resource to understand that. So this is one of the problems. And so we want definitions, we want clear, distinct lines, and we want the ability to partner with our regulators to be good stewards.
So you want to go back to the late 80s as adjusted by court rulings, or are you agreeable to new definitions?
I can only speak for Farm Bureau, and our policy would be to seek a new rule that clearly defines what is jurisdictional and what is not, and set aside some of these ambiguous terms that have been placed in front of us.
So the definition of persistence?
Well, there's so many definitions. Adjacency, wetlands. What is a wetland? What is a clear, understood definition between Fish and Wildlife and DNR and everyone else that we can all agree upon?
Do you want regional differences in knowledge?
Oh, I think every topography that a farmer has is different. I think it has to fit your own landscape. There's a difference in northern Iowa and southern Iowa, and I live in southern Iowa. So our concerns are different, and our adherence to the Clean Water Act should be reflected differently.
He certainly noted that the ambiguity of this 2015 law hinders the ability for the state legislature to make some action on water quality. Is that the reality until there are federal changes for 2018? I mean, will the state legislature be able to move forward on water quality if this hasn't been resolved by now?
Yeah, what I'm saying is the nutrient reduction strategy that we have in place that we believe is the right strategy to help identify, to help with water quality and soil health. So what we're talking about is putting in place a dedicated and long-term and growing revenue source that will help us work with farmers and communities across the state that would allow us to identify best practices and then scale those so that we can reach the outcome that we're all working towards. What I'm saying is we'd put a lot of efforts into putting that strategy together, which the previous administration highlighted as a great role model and example of other states to follow. But in implementing the 2015 Waters of the U.S., it really mitigated our opportunity to execute what we were trying to do in the nutrient reduction strategy. So they said one thing here, but when they got back to Washington, D.C., they did just the opposite. With this administrator, he said, well, we're going to do just the opposite. I want to take what you're doing here. He was very interested in the strategy that Secretary Northey had worked so hard on with Iowa State University and the Department of Natural Resources, as well as a lot of input from our farmers that every day are doing the right thing, because the greatest asset that they have is the land that they work every single day. These are generational farms. There were farmers in there that were fifth generation farmers that talked about how their grandfather worked the soil to, well, they're working the soil today. So he just brought a different perspective to it. He brought an understanding and a trust that the individuals in this state and across this country that rely on the land, not only for their quality of life, but certainly understand their role in feeding and fueling the world. And so to look at ways that we can partner together to maintain, as well as work to not shut down growth and our ability to do what we take very seriously, and that is feeding the world.
So what's this new rule going to say? If you had an ideal way to write this rule, what would it say?
Well, I would do exactly what he's doing, and he is reaching out to the individuals that will be impacted across not only Iowa, but across the nation to get the feedback that they need to hear in order to put this together so that we get it right this time. Senator?
I just wanted to say quite simply that the administrator wants to work with all of the different agencies as necessary to define, actually put definitions into the rules so there is clarity. But he went a step further by stating that not only should we define what a water of the U.S. is, but what it is not.
Yes.
So that puddle in the driveway at my dad's farm is not a water of the U.S., where right now it might be defined as a water of the U.S. So not only what those definitions are for clarity for farmers, ranchers, business owners, but what it is not and what the federal government does not have jurisdiction over.
And I think Bill either alluded to this or Craig did, but you know, they're going to gather input. They're going to go back, put it together. And I think they indicated that they would come back and just say, this is what we think we heard, you know, and this is where we believe we need to go. And so I appreciate the continued outreach that they are making in order to get it right. And it's on somewhat of an aggressive timeline. And I think we certainly appreciate that too. There is a commitment to not have this linger, to do it right, to get feedback, put it together, back out again, but to still do that in a timely manner so that we can provide the predictability and stability that they were asking for in the meeting. Is that public? His timeline?
Well, it was discussed.
It was
but-
discussed, but I will let the administrator answer that question. I don't want to get out ahead of him, but he's moving on it. So that's my message, is that they really are aggressive in what they're doing, and they're out there meeting and listening, and they really want to get this resolved, I think, sooner rather than later would be.
Give a 30-day comment period.
Oh, yeah, well, for that, well, yeah, the 28th is when that ends, and then they'll move forward with writing the rule. So I do know that. I'm sorry, I didn't know that was the question you were asking, but that closes on the 28th. So he was encouraging people to continue and to comment and to get those in. It was an important part of the process. August 28th.
I have a question regarding the report that came out regarding the state home.
We will take those questions separately. We're going to just stick with this right now since I've got the people that are participating in this. We're going to stay on topic. Are there any other questions regarding?
I was just going to ask, are there any more specifics that the public can understand about where you stand on what kind of different changes you want in this law?
You ask if there's, I'm sorry.
More specific
Oh.
details about what it is you as governor want.
We actually filed a letter, so we have formally made comments that would be public, that you have an opportunity, or if not, we can get that to you. So we have made formal comments in regards to what we're looking for with the rewrite of the rule. But you know, what we heard from the farmers who are participating in the roundtable is, again, predictability, clarity, and clarity not only on the definition, but what it doesn't impact. And so I think that's what we would hope for. So thank you. I want to again thank all of you for participating, and I want to thank Craig Hill and Iowa Farm Bureau for hosting us today. Thank you very much.
Yeah.